GM, everyone, how we doing? It is good to be in this Pinto Town Hall on May the 6th. Very interesting time on the farm. Figure maybe the best way to do this town hall is to open it up, see if people have thoughts or comments. I have some stuff to talk about on my end, but given the nature of the town hall, open season, if people have things they want to talk about. All right, well, I'll kick us off. The movement downward in the Pinto supply since the launch of Tractor um, is very interesting to me. I can't say that we have a snowball, or at least it's unclear. Originally we were talking about the change in the soil issuance as like a soil snowball, and then it turned out there was too much friction. Tractor removed the friction. So it's like now we sort of do get an opportunity to see how the mechanism is working. And I think it's working fabulously. It's very exciting. You look at the Pinto supply has started to come down faster. When you think about a snowball, I don't know, to me, somehow intuitively, it feels like it's accelerating. It's unclear at this point if there's an acceleration or if this is just a steady churn. Now, with a system like Pinto, I think a steady churn is totally okay. It may just take longer for the system to return itself to its value target, but it's been very interesting to see how the rate of change of the Pinto supply has changed over the past couple of weeks, where it sort of slowed down, then it picked up again, now it slowed down. It's all been better than it was prior to the launch of Tractor, quite significantly so. But nonetheless, there isn't some major acceleration. The length of the queue isn't necessarily so large, or growing. And so, in fact, right now, I think the queue's been shrinking a little bit. So, I mean, I'm interested in what people have to say about this, and in particular, if you're not sowing now, what would it take for you to sow? And I think originally people had cited that the temp was going up, and that felt unsustainable. And that was dangerous and scary for people, such that they were hesitant to lend to the protocol. But now, if you look at the temp is coming down quite consistently, thanks to the launch of Tractor. So much so, I think there's an open question as to whether or not it's going to end up coming down too fast. It seems like right now, with the way Tractor is working and the fact that soil is sort of manipulable, this is something that to date hasn't been manipulated, but now that we have automated bots, it may be manipulated. It may be that the temp comes down too much, and now the field is going to be incapacitated that way. So I think this is all just very interesting, but I'm curious how people view sowing. I've certainly been participating with Tractor. I think Tractor is really innovative, and it's allowed me to participate in more detailed ways. And I'm curious how other people that are participating in the system at this stage of the game feel like it's affecting their behavior. It certainly made me more inclined to sow, and to sow at lower temps.
Which part exactly made you more inclined to sow?
Well, it's easy to do it, and when I'm selecting a number, I'm like, ooh, I don't want my order to be to get to run out before because the temp goes too low, and then it doesn't get executed. So I'm happy to bid lower temps.
So I wonder if this is a common thing that's happening with people or just me, but so Tractor comes out and I was really happy to be able to use it to sow everything that I had already been planning to sow. Like you said, the temperature started dropping, so that was sort of a a reason for me to like everything that I had already planned to sow it at that point because the returns would be less so if I decided to wait. But at some point, everything that I had wanted to sow was sown. Like if you look and maybe sort of average it out, there's maybe 5,000, 7,500 Pinto going through and getting sown per day. And I just don't have that kind of capital to participate anymore, right?
Well, are you saying that you're not incentivized to participate as an individual because you're out of value to sow, or that you are still holding value in the silo and prefer that over sowing?
No, everything that was going to be sowed is sowed.
You say was going to be sowed, but are you still holding
Yes,
assets
like
in the silo?
no, there's nothing being held in silo anymore.
So your full position
Um,
in Pinto is 100% sown.
All in, baby.
And you sowed once the temp started going down because it seemed like that was the max temp that you were going to get.
There's more considerations, like the pod line increases, right? So you could argue that
Totally.
if
Exactly.
everything was to return, you could go back into silo.
Exactly. But I'm just suggesting that the thing that changed that caused you to sow was that the temp started to go down at the margin. That was what changed. Like
Partially.
before the
I
temp was
think
going up.
also Tractor
Hold on.
making it automated, right? Not having to like, be at a computer once an hour or something. That just
Totally.
made it easier to just like, all right, here's how much I'm willing to sow per season. Just let Tractor take care of it.
Totally. I mean, to me, this is super interesting. From where I sit, it's like that's exactly how we would expect an efficient actor within the system to behave, if you know what I mean, at this point. Like, if you assume full repayment of the end of the pod line, you're going to get more returns being in the pod line versus being in the silo. So then it's like, yeah, when do you sow? And I think the way that you played it makes total sense.
Right. So I guess what I'm saying is that I wonder if there are other people in the same situation. We saw a lot of sowing right when Tractor comes out, and then it started to sort of slow down. And I mean, at least for me, I just don't have the type of capital to keep participating. Um, so I wonder if other people had this sort of like backlog of stuff that they had wanted to sow that they had like bookmarked for it, and now that they've been able to, they're sort of just in a sit and wait scenario. Either they're waiting for more paychecks from their company or waiting to see what the system does. But at this point, there's just no more capital to put into the system, and they like there's no other way to participate. Like sewing is very much the all-in maneuver. There's nothing else that they can do to push, help return to peg.
Yeah, I mean, this is where you may end up the thing that may end up being playing out is that you have a competition right now between the silo and the field where people expect I don't know if the game is being played this efficiently is the thing. Like I think the thing that is most likely is that people just aren't paying attention that closely. But it's hard to know because on the other hand, because the real question you're asking is why would people still hold assets in the silo, right? And then there's two classes of assets in the silo, as I see it. There's just straight Pinto, and then there's LP tokens. If you're going to hold Pinto or LP tokens at this point, I think it's mostly because you want to participate in the conversions of the system and feel like there's a lot of value. Like I would assume that participants already have a lot of field exposure and see there to be value in being able to participate in the silo. Like the silo is where the price management happens, right? The field is where the debt management happens, but the silo is where the price management of the currency happens. And it's a collective effort where everyone is able to sort of express their preferences through conversions and buying and selling the currency. And at this point, you're like, well, I, as an individual that just believes in the system, as a smaller player, I feel like the thing that I was most incentivized to do was to sow everything and now sort of hope for the best and for the system to grow. And now you're like, well, why aren't people sowing more? And if we could attract enough sowing, enough lenders, the supply would decrease enough, or the enough LP would get converted to Pinto to facilitate the sowing that we would return to PEG and eventually print. And I think that is what we expect, but we're still at a point of price discovery. I think people don't know if the temp is really coming down now for good or if it's going to keep going up. There's also an interesting dynamic, as I see it, where the seeds in Pinto, because we changed the crop ratio, are now double or more the seeds on the LP tokens. There is a real thought of like, well, if I'm going to hold in the silo for a while and we're not going to return to PEG and start printing anytime soon, then the amount of seeds that you get if you're holding just Pinto may actually be better than the field. I don't really think I subscribe to that thesis. The way the system would have to play out where you're better off in the silo versus the field, even at such a high seeds, I just don't see that being likely. But when you have such a disproportionate amount of seeds on Pinto, you have to be very careful about that. Like the way that the seed gauge system was originally designed wasn't really factoring in having a crop ratio greater than 100%. So now we have an interesting edge case where it's like the seeds are so high on Pinto that it may actually discourage sowing to some extent. I don't think we're there. Maybe it makes sense to run more analysis on comparison on the returns based on sort of the time of the growth, but just interesting to see how this is all playing out. But I appreciate your sharing your actions. From where I sit, I'm still holding assets in the silo. I think there's an open question as to how high the temperature can get in the field. I don't know if we're close to the point where it's like, I'm just going to take all of my LP tokens and all of my Pinto and sow all of them. For me, it's like there is tremendous utility as a participant in the system from being able to participate in converts, even if it's not the most value optimized from just a pure return perspective. Because I think the EV at this early stage is not necessarily perfect for everyone to just play perfect game theory for themselves. So this is part of the friction of such an early system. Like the incentives don't exactly work yet because we don't have frictionless participation and we don't have enough participants for sort of like an equilibrium that the system is expressing or trying to incentivize to shine through. I think we're seeing with Tractor just how powerful it is to lower the friction and make it accessible to people. Like immediately this potential problem with the way that the temperature is set and demand for soil is measured, and potentially some of the cases for the temperature changes. All of this is really exciting because it's like now that we have people with the ability to sow, it's like, well, are they just sowing to lower the temperature or are they sowing because there's demand for soil? I think that's an open question. Like this is a little bit of a game of cat and mouse right now as we try to get the incentive structure perfect. So I encourage everyone to be patient. This is the point of the experiment. Like we're learning in real time what are the edge cases that we haven't covered yet. And if the goal is really to create a new monetary system, which to me it is the goal, we have to discover these edge cases in the environment that we currently have, where it's like things are pretty orderly and we're able to address them without things blowing up. So it's like the temp coming down is okay. I think it's great that some people are starting to sow, but it's still early to see how the Tractor implementation actually affects the system, and it's only in the field so far. So I'll be very interested to see once we have some sort of convert mechanism with Tractor, such that we sort of have like a convert order book. At that point, I'll be very interested, plus a bonus system for converts. At that point, I'll be very interested to see, like, is it that people want to stay in the silo and they just prefer having liquid assets? Is it that people want to participate in price discovery? Is it that people think it's better to be in the silo? I think we'll get a lot more information once we have Tractor and converts for Tractor with a convert bonus. A little bit of a ramble, but hopefully that's some helpful color for you. Sage of the silos.
Yeah, really useful. I think the two big things you brought up that kind of resonated were one, sort of how much you're in the system. Like for me, somebody that's like real small fish, maybe it just, you don't really have the leverage to do these things in the silo, like somebody that has more capital does. And two is your active participation. Somebody that's going to be watching everything and understanding the whole system end to end. I think, like you said, you would, maybe be able to do more with the silo if you're actively managing, whereas the field is very much like you sow and then that's it. You wait for the pod line to decrease. There's nothing else you can do with that. So I think those are probably the two big differences with the reason that I've acted the way I have and the reason other people haven't.
And ultimately, it's like, let's say that the system is run in a way that is hyper efficient. Everyone plays the system perfectly. And all of the Pinto that's currently in the silo is sown, right? Like right now, there's like 6 million and change Pinto in the silo or something. Plus the Delta B is like 500,000. So let's say we add another million Pinto. So call it like 7 million Pinto or so, 7.5 million Pinto. If the interest rate the system has to pay is, I don't know, 15 million, the system's going to issue another 100 million pods. Right now, there's like 36 million pods. So say we go to 136 million pods, and about half of the value issued goes to pod payments. So you need like 260, 270 of mints. And right now, there's like 10 million of value in the system. Like right now, for the system to guaranteed repeg and go through a full growth cycle, we would need like the market to value the system at something like 300 million. And this is the thing about where the system's currently at. It's like it's a catch-22. If the protocol is able to go through a full debt cycle and attract enough lenders to repeg itself, where people are lending 10 million pods or equivalent in tranches of that magnitude to the system, then it is de facto credit worthy and by definition worthy of such a valuation. And then we could expect a sustainable system to grow on top of that. Whereas otherwise, right now, we're just sort of hanging out in this limbo period where it's at 69 cents, and we expect conversions to repeg the system in terms of market cap. But like in some sense, the activity in the silo is an evaluation of current market cap, whereas the activity in the field is an evaluation of future market cap. And the fact that there's sowing happening at 36 million with a 10 million supply says to me that the current valuation is somewhere in the 80 to 90 million range on the field side. But then you look on the silo side and it's closer to 7 million. So this is where if Pinto were like perfect and users were able to interface with it perfectly, I think it's likely that these valuations would be very close to one another. Now, the valuation in the silo should actually be some sort of like yield adjusted based on some future expected mints or some curve of mints over time. It's a little more complicated. But right now you have this huge inefficiency between the field and the silo. And on the one hand, you have the field value, like the protocol is in a very interesting spot because on the one hand, the field was the place that was valuing it much higher than in the silo. On the other hand, the field was also quite inefficient. But now, even though the field is more efficient, it seems like the temp going down, it's unclear if that's actually a good thing at this point. Because the price hasn't really gone up. And there's no snowball. So it's just interesting because now we have a much more efficient field system. It seems like the field may be improperly parameterized. But then in the silo, we don't have much activity going on. There's not much conversions happening. And so now it's like, okay, well, if we implement Tractor, will that help? If we implement a bonus, will that help? open questions and more data to try to understand why users aren't converting. But it's not so clear to me.
You said something like if people's interactions with Pinto were perfect, that the silo implied market cap would be closer to the field implied market cap. Can you explain what you mean?
Like there's some future expected value implied by the lenders at the back of the pod line. And in some sense, the value of the silo should be some of the liquid currency. On the one hand, like the lenders can really be lending to the protocol, really just anticipating future demand. So future demand actually has nothing to do with current demand in a sense. And that's important to really ensure we're clear on. Like the beauty of the mechanism is that there is a decoupling of the current demand for the currency and the future demand, right? So it's like the stability comes from the ability to dampen volatility, comes from the ability to call on the expectation of an increase in future demand to the present. You don't really want the pod line to be magnitude like such a multiplier over the current supply typically. Now, this is like the protocol's first debt cycle. It's a very young protocol. The interest rate it has to pay is incredibly high because it has no credit history. C'est la vie. But in the future, like what's a healthy debt level for a system? Not more than 200% at scale. Maybe 100%, maybe 50%. That's for the market to figure out. But the point is, at that magnitude, the relationship between the debt, like there's going to be a liquidity premium for being in the silo, or an illiquidity premium, depending on how you want to think about it, for being in the field. But there will be a market for pods. So in theory, there will be a liquid secondary for pods. And there will also be a market for deposits where a deposit based on the amount of stock it has will have some implied price given some future expected demand curve. So it's like, if anything, the real thing that ties together the silo in the field is some expected supply increase over time. Like, when do you expect the mints to happen? If you expect the mints to happen soon, you probably want to stay in the silo. If you expect the mints to happen in a long time, maybe you prefer to be in the field. But there is also this like intra-silo dynamic where it's like, well, if you think that the people that are going to sow are people that have a lot of stock, such that your percentage of the stock is going to go up, maybe you want to stay. It's very interesting game theory. But right now, we're sort of still in the early stages of finding out how people are going to play this whole thing. But I guess to answer your question, it's like we will have some market, at least when things become efficient. And we're not there yet. But there will be some expected mint curve that is both derived from the pod market and derived from the deposit marketplace on the future expected mints from the system. And that will be how the two sort of tie together, where what you would pay for a deposit and the amount of stock is a function of the expectation of future mints over time. And similarly, what you would pay for a pod, given its illiquidity, what you would pay there, if that makes sense. So it's a little complicated. I'm no professional financial modeler, but that's how I imagine it would work. What else?
I want to go back again to an earlier question I think that you asked, is how do we feel about this change? I think whether I'm participating in the field or not, as an overall participant, I feel more confident or comfortable with how the field is issuing debt. And I'm interested in seeing when there is like a lot of demand. I know I've seen some demand with Tractor. I'm just like wondering if we see not unlimited, but non-stop demand. If the minimum soil available is actually a good enough number, or do you want to decrease it or increase it maybe? Because I see there's an argument to increasing it as well.
You're saying to see if there's manipulation?
That I'm also interested in seeing is that maybe we go back again. So the snowball effect is great. We're issuing that in like a sustained way. Maybe even slow it down a little bit more than now. I see that now this is not an issue. I'm just like wondering at times of high demand, maybe we don't even need to issue this fast or this quick, even though it's already reduced with this latest change. I'm just wondering if it's enough.
To reduce what? The cultivation factor?
In effect, is the minimum amount of that's available to sow every season, and I believe that's a function of the cultivation factor. Yes.
And are you suggesting also that the rate of change of soil issued per season also decreases, or that's a separate point that you didn't mention?
In effect, that would do it, but it doesn't have to be that way. Someone mentioned, I think the number. What's the number now? The total that could be sown in a day, like 5,000 or 5,000. What was the number that was mentioned?
I just did some math looking at the like field orders. I just sort of like added them up. How much had been sown.
Yeah.
There wasn't. It's not really like a hard max or min.
Yes.
since it's sort of
I imagine, because that number wouldn't. I would imagine that number would grow as well. In my head, someone can correct me if this is not how it works. So with every season that gets filled, that season after, the amount of minimum soil available increases a little bit, and then that keeps on like adding up. I'm just wondering if we would benefit from when there is like times of high demand and this is like picking up and every season is increasing. Then maybe we're still issuing a lot of soil and we want to even decrease that. But I think this is something that we will see when we have a lot of like demand for the field. We're like selling out every season. And I think we've already reduced that amount given this like latest change. So it may not be enough, but I'm interested in seeing that if it's not even enough and we want to reduce it a little bit more. I don't know if I'm being clear here. Maybe I'm confusing you guys more than clarifying something.
I mean, I'm personally interested in changing the rate of the cultivation factor, from a linear to more exponential curve. For me, it feels like what happened was, during the first couple seasons when soil sold out, the rate was increasing way too fast. And then once we've kind of seen somewhat of a snowball, the rate was already so fast that it quickly just dropped. I'm just looking at the everything chart right now, and one of the things we can look at is I believe it's the amount of soil that can be issued at one time. And it's very linear; it just goes up and then drops down very quickly. Whereas I think a more better way the system could ultimately issue soil would be to slowly ramp it up uh, over time, and such that it ramps up faster when the cultivation factor is closer towards 1 and slower when it's closer towards 0. I think that would extend the snowball and thus, we would see a better snowball effect than what we see right now.
Yeah, I feel like the meta level insight, there's a couple. One is slow is better. We're so far away from this being an efficient market where everyone sort of has bought into some canonical game theory where the protocol is obviously credit worthy. And therefore, I think the protocol changing things like the cultivation factor pretty slowly is probably for the best. Like, shouldn't the protocol really try to suss out, can it sustain demand of very little soil for a little while before it starts to raise how much it wants to sell every season? So I just feel like patience from the protocol is something that can really help it. Trying to raise the cultivation factor instantly is quite rushed, and I think patience really helps the protocol in this case. It has time. And then the other is like from an implementation perspective, I feel like the types of gauges that we want to design in order to enable the protocol to sort of like smoothly change this stuff. It's very interesting what this would look, what a generalized, I know we've talked about like a generalized gauge system, but it's just so interesting to think about like, given price, debt level, liquidity level, how we would want this curve to change and the shape of it to change. Like, is each it just gets pretty complicated pretty quickly.
Well, at the moment, I think we only have one sow order the last couple of days, and it's capped out at something like 400 per sow, which is causing the cultivation factor to get reset every time there's like a little bit more than 400 soil available. So it seems that the behavior of that sower is that they'd rather drive the temperature down than actually sow a bunch of pods at a high temp. Otherwise, they would set a much higher like amount to sow per season. But it does have an interesting effect of resetting the cultivation factor kind of pretty frequently, and it in effect means that it's that one order is driving down the temperature quite significantly. Although it is at some cost of if they hit the max 400 times 24 hours would be about 10K a day, but it's averaging probably at around half that, so perhaps 5K a day, which is certainly better than nothing getting sown per day. So interesting.
Yeah, I posted the cultivation factor on the town hall chat to kind of look at the effects. We can kind of see these two huge spikes in the cultivation factor, and then we've seen this like oscillating cultivation factor going from 1% to let's say 3%. I find this very interesting. I feel like this is probably this curve, or I guess this kind of shape we see right now, can probably be improved and iterated upon. Personally, seeing this,
How do you think it can be improved?
I mean, it just kind of like goes up and down very fast. Like like Ben said, the protocol has time to change the cultivation factor in a less aggressive way. From my perspective, it looks like I feel like a slower increase, uh, ramping up over time in this, like in an exponential fashion would probably be better than this up and down we see right now. Because I feel like this up and down motion, or the way the cultivation factor is right now, it doesn't lend itself to any like snowball. And when it does have a snowball, it quickly uh, extinguishes the snowball. Right? We see this huge increase from 1% to 18%, and then quickly back down in a matter of a day. I would much rather see this happen over weeks.
So you'd rather see it
Even if
increase
the
like half as fast, or a quarter as fast, but then still decrease quickly?
like probably like just to put some numbers, maybe half as fast, maybe a quarter of the rate now, and then like half as fast once it reaches 10%, and then uh 3/4 as fast once it reaches 20%, right? So that even if we sell the same amount in a given time, uh having it slowly increase and ramp up over time, I think is better than having all the soil sown immediately, like in the first half of the week, and then resetting it to now, if that makes sense.
The only problem with a quickly or with a slowly increasing cultivation factor is it effectively means that if you want to sow with size, you're going to really drive the temperature down, and your average sow temperature is going to be much lower. But I guess that's fine if the market knows that and takes that into account.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I feel like the cultivation factor and soil issuance is directly tied to how temperature should be changed. Like, I feel like if we're taking a stance that things should be slower, the temperature changes should also decrease in magnitude as well.
I feel like what Ford Pinto just said is pretty interesting, where if you want to sow a big amount and know that you're not going to be able to, uh, because the increase, because some future PI slows down the increase in the cultivation factor, you are sort of motivated to basically treat the current temperature, or I guess wait longer in some sense for a higher temperature. Obviously, there are costs to doing so, but to your point, you're not really going to get the temperature as stated.
Yeah, I just
On
wouldn't want
average.
to like discourage sowing as well. Like the system still needs to pull a lot of Pinto off the market in order to return to peg. So if you make this kind of like pipe as to how much can be sown, over X amount of time too small, then it's like it takes a ridiculous amount of time to get back to peg. But I guess it's better to have some sowing than no sowing. So there's a balance to be had.
I think this is related to the question of like, does the protocol have the ability to reliably, quickly call on its creditors to return to peg, or is it something that it has to build very slowly, right? Like if the protocol has creditors, it's not going to be any problem attracting enough creditors given the decrease in demand for Pinto, then yeah, it should happen pretty quickly. A la if the L2SR is high and the debt level is low, it should happen quickly. But when the L2SR is low and the debt level is high, it should happen super slowly.
Ben, something you mentioned earlier in response to Sage was that you have not sown all of your silo position because you think that it's worth like having some in order to be able to mess with converts. I feel like that's kind of you're not like following the incentives of the system, and that's kind of like you could even argue messing the system up itself if the people who are participating are not like following what the system is incentivizing a rational actor to do. So basically, you're acting irrationally, and the system's not going to be able to, compensate for irrational actors. So it's almost like an attack on the system, as it were. What do you think of that?
Well, one of my favorite stories is a physicist, philosopher, and an economist are stuck on a beach, and their boat was wrecked, but they have some cans of goods, and they're trying to figure out how to open up the cans. And we don't need to get into the jokes about the philosopher and the physicist, but what does the economist say about how to open up the cans? The economist says, well, imagine we have a can opener. And that's what comes to my mind when I hear you, Ford Pinto, because the reality is that these are systems, like crypto economic systems, are systems that fundamentally have to handle humans as the participants. And you can say you're not being rational according to the closed game theory of just the system itself. But that's not reality. Like, reality is that the system exists in a larger context. And it's ultimately the system is only going to work if it has incentive mechanisms that are strong enough to compel people, even when they are acting based on things that the system may not view as entirely rational. So that you can say that I'm irrational. I say, convince me to act the way you want me to act. And the crop ratio going so high has definitely caused me to change how I act, has definitely gotten me to convert more. You could say the system is acting irrationally because now it's prioritizing holding Pinto over holding LP, but it tested me. It's testing me to see at what price would I convert. And now you're saying, well, you're irrational in the first place because shouldn't you be sowing everything and therefore all of the seeds are worthless anyways? And to that I say no. Like, in my mind, holding stock and seeds is tremendously valuable. So I'm not willing to sow all of my stuff. Even if the system is pricing it that I would make more money if I did that.
So you're basically assigning some kind of value to stock and seeds over pods. Do you have a specific formula in which way you value those, or is it more of like a gut feeling?
It's not just stock and seeds. I'm trying to say also the ability to participate in price discovery of the asset. Like a la Sage of the Silos, I've invested my allocation to the protocol at this point. In the short term, I have no intention of allocating any more value to the protocol. So now I just have value within the protocol. And there's a question of in what form do I choose to hold that value? There's not a lot of liquidity on the secondary for pods. So there's no way to go back into the liquid market and hold silo exposure once I move to the field. It currently feels like a one-way door. I think it's more likely than not that the temp will go up again in the future. So I don't view it as like a one-time thing for me to be able to sow right now. And I do view having significant value in the silo and being able to participate in price discovery is helpful. I think there's still value that may leave the system that isn't convicted about the creditworthiness of the protocol, that I'd rather that they leave the protocol now than if the protocol returns to its value target, doesn't print for a couple weeks, and then the people leave at a higher price. That's a way worse outcome, I think, for all the long-term holders of the system. So right now we're not in a position where it seems like the protocol is going to grow anytime particularly soon. At the same time, I feel like it's making a great case for its ability to create low volatility. The price is super low in terms of its volatility at the moment. And so it's like, this is logging good time. I'm not so interested in using all of my convert power to return the price to its value target immediately, when I think what's more likely than not is there's not going to be any sustainable prints at the moment because we don't have any new demand coming in. And I feel like already people that are going to really believe in the system are going to come in because they see that there's low volatility, not because they see that there are prints. I know you and I may disagree about that particularly, but from where I sit, I'm very comfortable with the protocol oscillating its price in the 70s, and I think this is all healthy data. So as a participant in the system, I'm not interested in converting all my value, and increasing the price significantly to give a better exit price to people that are probably going to leave anyways. That's how I see it at this point.
Got it. Makes sense. Yeah, I do think, if I recall correctly, we saw Bean drop down to like 25 cents or something after kind of its initial splash. Do you think that we'll see Pinto drop down to those levels?
I mean, don't quote me on it, but that would be pretty low, that would be surprising to me at this point in time. But you never know. Like, liquidity's pretty low. There's like $6 million of value in the silo. So if all of that left, it's definitely possible, but that would be surprising to me.
You mentioned you've already allocated like the amount of capital that you feel comfortable with into Pinto. Is there anything the system could do to get you to allocate more? Because it seems like at some point it needs to attract more capital in order to really return to peg and have the system grow.
Well, I mean, of course, but it's like at what order of magnitude? I'm not that rich. So I feel like what's more reasonable is for the system to try to log good data and then us to convince other people to participate in the system because it's working,
Yeah. Is there some, when you talk to people in the wild, is there something that they bring up that makes it seem like the system is not creditworthy to them?
No, but I don't know if that's enough. I think people are so burned by algo stables and so jaded in general. I think it takes more at this point to get people to take a serious look, unfortunately. It seems like market conditions are quite different than they were last time.
How long do you think the protocol can sustain this 70 cents and approximately 1,100 temperature before it starts moving in either direction, either temp going higher and price dropping lower, or price going higher and temp dropping lower?
I think things are sustainable for a while at this point. I would like to see the protocol repeg itself within the next, 3 to 6 months, one way or another. But at this point, I think hanging out at 70 is great. For a first debt cycle, I think that's huge.
Yeah, one thing I was reflecting on was that the first run up, effectively the stock system could not work because everyone had the same amount of stock. So there was not really any cost to leaving the system because everyone had the same amount of grown stock. But on the second, on the next cycle that comes up in the future, I think we'll see things play out differently because a lot more of the mints will go to the longer term holders, and therefore like the hit and run capital is going to get a lot less of the mints, and therefore less will leave the system for those kind of like mercenary LPers. And so that's something that the system like couldn't account for on the first run up. And that ship has already sailed, but it's interesting to think about if there was something it could have done to like reduce the amount of capital that enters and exits, just for not for the long term but just for the short term. But yeah, will be cool to see how it plays out on the second run up, because I think the amount of capital that enters and exits might be like more sustainable, but TBD.
Yeah, and this is where it's like the stock system really does only play itself out over time. And from where I sit, like at this point, the crop of people that are still in the silo are not super likely to leave. Some of them may leave, but it's likely to be a small subset, if you know what I mean, unless there's crazy price action. So it's like separate from getting out that $1 million, and I think that's on the upper end. But aside from getting out that $1 million, like the question is the protocol, it has to incentivize converts one of two ways, either with stock bonuses or the temperature being so high that people convert to withdraw and sell. And so assuming a closed system, the way that the protocol is going to repeg itself, it's like it can either pay an exorbitant interest rate. Like right now, the fact that there's already so much Pinto in the system makes me think that it would have to be a very high temperature, or it can be through some sort of convert bonus system. You could also just shoot the crop rate up even further. Personally, I have a lot of interest in seeing what a convert bonus system would do, and particularly how it would work with Tractor before we shoot the crop ratio up higher. But I think moving the crop ratio higher would be interesting data as well. It's just sort of like you're playing with fire. And I'm interested in seeing how a convert bonus system works first. So that's sort of how I think about it.
Cool. Yeah, don't disagree there.
All right, we have about 5 minutes left in the hour. Do people have any closing remarks or thoughts? I just want to say, this is the long haul, in the sense of like we said we were going to launch this in the hopes of getting more data, collecting the data, understanding the data, responding to the data in a way that's reasonable and thoughtful and safe. This stuff takes time. And we are at a point where making these improvements is super nuanced and not so simple. So I really appreciate people being here and thinking through all this stuff and the level of care that is being put into making these changes properly. I think there's only a couple things that are missing to create a really clean machine that can incentivize things properly. There is still a little bit of manual requirements, like when to raise the crop ratio so high. We don't have that automated, things like that. But I think we're going to get there pretty soon. So grateful for the people that are still hanging around and paying attention to this and participating in this slow journey to build an automated new monetary system. So I think that concludes this town hall. Thank you for those that came. Thank you for those that participated. And talk soon.
Talk soon.
See you guys.